Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Diego with another video. Fantastic, of course, for you guys out there in green card land, K1 visa land. You're trying to get your K1 visa approved. You're trying to get your green cards approved, 2-year, 10-year. You're trying to renew your 10-year green card. Whatever you're trying to do, I have the answers for you right here. Absolutely have the answers for you right here. I have 13 years experience processing K1 visas and green cards, including my beautiful wife Karina from Caracas, Venezuela, and she just applied for her 10-year green card jointly with me using form I-751. Now, I'm not an immigration attorney. I don't give you legal advice. I do not work for USCIS, although maybe I should, right? I've got all this knowledge up in my brain and I data dump it right here into these videos for you guys. Now, this video is about the domicile requirement for a family-based green card sponsorship. What does domicile requirement mean? It means the American citizen sponsor has to be living in the United States of America in order to be able to apply for the K1 visa, for the green card, etc. So let's get into the video right now. Let's go. So what is the U.S. domicile requirement for a family-based green card sponsorship? Well, most petitioners file for an alien relative form I-130 or the K1 visa, and this requires the petitioner to also serve as a financial sponsor for the intending immigrant. In other words, you got to be making enough money to cover the family size of the person you're bringing to the United States. Now, among some of the requirements to qualify as a sponsor, the individual must be domiciled living in the United States or a U.S. territory. Like Guam, Puerto Rico, etc. Okay, so while demonstrating a U.S. domicile may be simple, it was for me. I live in Florida. For the petitioner who permanently resides in the United States. Now, a petitioner living abroad, somebody living abroad, will need to take extra steps to satisfy this requirement, making it much more difficult to get qualified, right? But there, you could be working for the U.S. government overseas, you could be in the military, etc. Now, the U.S. domicile requirement, having a U.S. domicile means that the United States is an individual's principal place of residence and is where the individual intends to remain for the foreseeable future. You're going to be in America for the rest of your life. Now, the possession of a U.S. citizenship or even lawful permanent residency status, commonly referred to as a green card, alone, this does not independently satisfy, the requirement of living in the United States or being designated as a U.S. domicile. And also, although a joint sponsor can sometimes be used, if you don't make enough money, to relieve a primary sponsor's financial responsibility, which you can use a joint sponsor. A joint sponsor does not relieve a primary sponsor's U.S. domicile requirement. In other words, getting a joint sponsor does not mean you still have to be living in the United States permanently, and you got to be able to prove it. So maintaining U.S. domicile when you are living abroad temporarily, for example, if you are in the U.S. military or if you work for the governments, perhaps you work for Homeland Security overseas. But in certain cases, a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident can maintain a U.S. domicile while they are living abroad. But it's very specific. So, for a U.S. citizen, U.S. domicile can be maintained if the individual is temporarily living abroad in the military. I was stationed in Italy, before in the past, in Sardinia. If you're engaged in certain qualifying employment, such as what I was doing, working for the U.S. government, or if you're working for a research institution recognized by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or you're a U.S. citizen working for a U.S. company engaged in developing foreign trade with the United States, or certain public international organizations, and in certain religious occupations, such as being a priest or a minister or on a mission. You could be a missionary in Colombia. Now, a legal permanent resident temporarily living abroad can also maintain a U.S. domicile if the individual has an approved Form N-470 application which preserves the residency for naturalization purposes in the future if you are a legal permanent resident. Now, establishing U.S. domicile after a prolonged residence abroad, you can do that. Okay, if a U.S. citizen living abroad no longer has a U.S. domicile, the individual can still file an immigrant petition on behalf of a family member. But listen up, ladies and gentlemen, the individual will ultimately have to have and must establish a U.S. domicile in order to qualify as a sponsor for a K-1 visa, for a 2-year green card, for a 10-year green card application for your beneficiary if you're filing jointly. Okay, so in such a case, the petitioner can sign and submit Form I-864, the Affidavit of Support, under Section 213A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA, for the beneficiary, and demonstrate that the petitioner is going to establish a U.S. domicile before or on the date of the beneficiary's adjustment of status or admission into the U.S. on a K-1, or you know, you got to be living in the United States of America, domiciled here, in order to qualify to get your beneficiary the green card. Okay, if a sponsor arrives in the United States together with a beneficiary with intent to establish a U.S. domicile upon arrival, like perhaps you could be in the military, okay, the sponsor can be deemed to have satisfied the U.S. domicile requirement at that time. So you've been stationed overseas for a couple of years and you're finally getting back to the States. You got to prove that you're coming back to your permanent residence of America. In practice, however, a sponsor living abroad will often need to demonstrate the establishment of or intent to establish a U.S. domicile prior to arriving in the United States together with the beneficiary, or prior to the beneficiary's adjustment of status to qualify as a sponsor. You got it? You understand what I'm saying? Per the U.S. Department of State Foreign Affairs Manual, Secretary of State Marco Rubio's Book of Magic Tricks, evidence of having or intending to establish a U.S. domicile includes, but is not limited to, a U.S. bank account, transferring funds to or making investments in the United States. You could be buying stocks and bonds, seeking or having U.S. employment, registering children in a U.S. school, applying for a social security number, or if you are a politically active person, voting in U.S. elections. So the bottom line is this: before you file for a K-1 visa or for a 2-year or a 10-year green card, Mr. American Citizen Sponsor, make sure you are domiciled, living full-time in the United States of America, unless you are perhaps in the U.S. military, okay, or working for Department of Homeland Security. But you can prove you are domiciled in the United States because you're living overseas only temporarily. Do you understand what I'm saying? So thanks for watching the video, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Don't forget, I do a live stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Central Time. And I also have a membership to the channel. If you want to join as a member down here somewhere, you can join as a member, and that way you'll get my phone number, my email address. You can give me a call, you can text me, you can email me. I will go over your entire application with you step by step, if you so desire, to make sure you don't make any silly mistakes. Like the painter Ross used to say, don't make any it's not a silly mistake, it's a happy mistake, right? Whatever. Join me on the live stream. Sometimes my beautiful wife Karina will accompany me. She's from Venezuela. She's in English class most of the week and working during the day, so she's a very busy person as she waits for adjudication of her 10-year green card while she also prepares to become a U.S. citizen. You got it? See you at the next live stream. And to our members, we appreciate your support. We really do. Karina and I thank you for your membership to this channel and help supporting the work that I do, so that I can basically get you over the finish line and get you approved with minimal stress and minimal cost as possible. See you at the next live stream.
I'll be back. Ha! You didn't not going to say that, did you?
That's what you always say.